poor twins lost in the forest find something terrible in the cabin. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent when Emma and Lily decided to take a shortcut through the backroads during their road trip across the countryside. The 23-year-old blonde twins had been driving for hours, eager to reach the coastal town where they had booked a small inn for the weekend. Emma, who sat in the passenger seat, studied the crumpled map they had bought at a gas station miles back, her blue eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of the faded lines and symbols. Lily gripped the steering wheel tighter as the paved road gradually transformed into gravel, then dirt, and finally into barely visible tire tracks cutting through overgrown grass. "We should turn back," Lily said, her voice carrying a tremor of uncertainty. "This doesn't look right at all." The trees on either side of them had grown denser, their branches creating a canopy that blocked out most of the remaining sunlight. Emma glanced at her phone, the screen showing no signal bars, just the mocking display of a dead network connection. She had tried calling for directions 20 minutes ago, but the call had dropped immediately, and now even that option was gone. "Just a bit further," Emma replied, though she wasn't entirely convinced herself. "The map shows a town just past this forest area. We must be close." But as the minutes turned into an hour, and the path became even more treacherous, doubt settled heavily in both their hearts. The car suddenly lurched, a horrible grinding sound erupting from beneath them. Lily slammed on the brakes, and they came to a shuddering stop. When she tried to restart the engine, it sputtered and died completely. "No, no, no," Lily whispered, turning the key again and again, but the car remained silent. The twins sat in the growing darkness, the reality of their situation sinking in like cold water. They were stranded in the middle of an unknown forest with no phone signal, no working vehicle, and no clear idea of where they were. Emma opened her door and stepped out, the forest floor soft and damp beneath her sneakers. The air smelled of earth and decay, and an unsettling silence hung around them, broken only by the occasional rustle of leaves. "We need to find help," Emma said, trying to sound braver than she felt. "Maybe there's a house or a ranger station nearby." Lily joined her sister, grabbing their shared backpack that contained some water bottles, snacks, and a flashlight. They locked the car, though it seemed pointless in such a desolate place, and began walking in the direction they had been driving. The forest seemed to close in around them, the trees towering like ancient sentinels watching their every move. After what felt like an eternity of walking through undergrowth and ducking under low branches, scratching their arms and faces on thorns, they saw it. Through a break in the trees, illuminated by the pale moonlight that had finally emerged, stood a cabin. It was old, constructed from dark wood that had weathered countless seasons, with a stone chimney rising from one side. A faint light flickered in one of the windows, suggesting someone was home. "Thank God," Lily breathed, relief flooding through her. Emma felt the same surge of hope, and they quickened their pace, emerging into a small clearing surrounding the cabin. The structure looked even more imposing up close, almost unnaturally large, with a front door that seemed built for someone much taller than average. They exchanged a glance, a wordless communication that had always existed between them, acknowledging the strangeness but having no other choice. Emma knocked on the heavy wooden door, the sound echoing dully. For a long moment there was no response, just the crackling of what must have been a fire inside. Then they heard it, heavy footsteps, slow and deliberate, approaching from within. The door swung open, and both twins had to tilt their heads back to see the face of the creature that stood before them. He was enormous, easily over 7 feet tall, with a broad, hunched frame that filled the entire doorway. His skin had a grayish tint in the dim light, and his features were rough and misshapen, with a prominent brow, a wide flat nose, and a mouth that curved downward in a permanent scowl. Small, dark eyes studied them with an intelligence that was somehow more frightening than mindless savagery. He wore simple clothes, a stained tunic and rough trousers, and his massive hands gripped the doorframe. "Lost?" he asked, his voice a deep rumble that seemed to vibrate through their chest. The twins nodded, unable to find their voices for a moment. Emma finally managed to speak. Our car broke down on the road. We need help, maybe use a phone? The ogre, for that was surely what he was, something out of fairy tales and nightmares made flesh, stared at them for several seconds. Then, surprisingly, he stepped aside. "Come in," he said. "Cold night. Dangerous forest. You stay here." Relief and apprehension warred within both sisters, but the temperature had indeed dropped significantly, and the thought of spending the night in the dark forest was terrifying. They stepped inside, the warmth from the fireplace immediately enveloping them. The cabin's interior was surprisingly spacious, with rough furniture that matched the owner's size, shelves lined with jars containing unidentifiable contents, and various pelts hanging on the walls. "Sit," the ogre commanded, gesturing to a large wooden bench near the fire. The twins obeyed, their eyes darting around the room, taking in every detail. The ogre moved to a pot hanging over the fire, stirring something that smelled surprisingly pleasant, like herbs and vegetables. "I am Grendok," he said without turning around. "You eat, then sleep. Morning, I help with car." Emma and Lily introduced themselves, their voices small in the cavernous space. Grendok served them bowls of the stew, which was actually quite good, though they ate cautiously, watching him for any sign of danger. He sat across from them in a massive chair, watching them eat with those unsettling dark eyes. As the night wore on, exhaustion began to overtake their fear. The warmth of the fire, the full stomachs, and the stress of the day all combined to make their eyelids heavy. "You sleep there," Grendok said, pointing to a corner where some rough blankets had been laid out. "Is safe." The twins settled onto the makeshift bed, whispering to each other in the darkness after the ogre had retired to what must have been his sleeping quarters behind a heavy door. "Do you think we can trust him?" Lily whispered. "I don't know," Emma replied, "but what choice do we have? Let's just get through the night." But sleep did not bring peace. Emma woke to the sound of heavy footsteps and the creak of floorboards. She opened her eyes to see Grendok standing over them, his massive form blocking out the dying firelight. Before she could scream, his huge hands reached down, grabbing both her and Lily. The twins cried out, struggling against his iron grip, but they might as well have been trying to fight a mountain. He carried them across the room with ease, their desperate kicks and punches having no effect on his thick hide. Grendok pulled open a trapdoor in the floor that they hadn't noticed earlier, revealing a set of crude stone steps leading down into darkness. "No, please," Emma screamed, but the ogre said nothing, his expression unreadable as he descended into what must have been a cellar or basement. At the bottom, he dropped them onto the cold stone floor. The space was lit by a single torch mounted on the wall, revealing a room perhaps 15 feet square, with stone walls and a dirt floor in the center. Various chains hung from hooks on the walls, and in the corner they could see bones, some disturbingly large, others that might have been human. "You stay," Grendok said simply. "Morning we talk." He turned and climbed back up the stairs, pulling the trapdoor shut behind him. They heard the sound of something heavy being dragged over it, sealing them in. The twins scrambled to their feet, Lily immediately running to the stairs and pushing against the trapdoor, but it wouldn't budge. Emma joined her, both of them straining with all their strength, but whatever Grendok had placed on top was far too heavy. "What are we going to do?" Lily sobbed, sliding down to sit on the stairs. Emma fought to keep her own panic under control. She examined the room carefully, looking for any possible escape route. The walls were solid stone, the torch was too high to reach without climbing, and there were no windows. The only other feature was a small drainage grate in the center of the dirt section of floor, presumably to let water run off. "Wait," Emma said, moving to the grate. She knelt down and tried to pry it up, her fingers scrabbling at the edges. Lily joined her, and together they managed to lift the heavy iron grating. Beneath it was a narrow drainage pipe, dark and ominous, but possibly large enough for them to crawl through. It was their only chance. Emma looked at her sister, seeing her own fear reflected in those identical blue eyes. "I'll go first," Emma said. "If it leads somewhere, I'll come back for you." No, Lily insisted. We go together. We've always done everything together. Emma nodded and carefully lowered herself into the pipe. It was tight, the rough stones scraping her arms and back, and the smell was awful, a mixture of mold, stagnant water, and things she didn't want to identify. But she could move forward, crawling on her belly through the darkness. Lily followed close behind, their breathing loud in the confined space. They crawled for what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the pipe occasionally dipping down or rising up, sometimes filled with an inch or two of freezing water that soaked through their clothes. Emma's hands were raw and bleeding from the rough stone, and she could hear Lily whimpering behind her, but neither of them suggested turning back. Finally, blessedly, Emma saw light ahead, just a faint gray luminescence that suggested an opening. She crawled faster, ignoring the pain, and emerged into another cellar, this one clearly abandoned, with crumbling walls and debris scattered across the floor. Wooden stairs led upward to a door that hung partially off its hinges. Lily tumbled out of the pipe behind her, and they embraced briefly, muddy and exhausted but free. They climbed the stairs carefully, testing each step before putting their full weight on it, and pushed through the door. They found themselves in the ruins of what must have been another cabin, long since abandoned, its roof partially collapsed and walls overtaken by vegetation. Through the gaps they could see the forest, still dark but with the first hints of dawn beginning to lighten the sky. They were out, but they had no idea where they were or how far they had traveled through that pipe. The important thing was they had escaped Grendok's cellar. "We need to find the road," Emma said, her voice hoarse. "Get as far away from here as possible." They pushed through the overgrown doorway and into the forest, choosing a direction that felt right and walking as quickly as they could through the underbrush. Behind them, they thought they heard a roar of rage, the sound of Grendok discovering their escape, but it might have been their imagination, the wind, or their own fear manifesting as sound. The twins ran, branches whipping at their faces, roots threatening to trip them with every step. The forest seemed endless, a maze of trees and shadows that all looked the same. Just when Emma thought they couldn't go any further, when her legs were burning and her lungs felt like they might burst, they burst through a line of trees and onto a road. A real, paved road with painted lines. They had made it. They collapsed onto the asphalt, gasping for breath, barely believing they were alive. In the distance they heard the sound of an engine, and minutes later, a pickup truck came around the bend. The driver, an elderly man with kind eyes, immediately pulled over when he saw them, taking in their muddy, bloodied appearance. "Good Lord, what happened to you girls?" he asked, helping them into his truck. They tried to explain, their words tumbling over each other, talking about the ogre, the cabin, the cellar, but the man just nodded sympathetically, clearly thinking they had been through some trauma but perhaps not quite believing the details. He drove them to the nearest town, where the police were called. The authorities searched for the cabin based on the twins' directions, but they never found it. The forest was vast, and the old logging roads had long since been reclaimed by nature. Some believed the girls had hallucinated from exposure and fear after their car broke down. Others whispered that there were things in the old forests that were better left undisturbed, remnants of an older world that occasionally crossed paths with ours. Emma and Lily never went back to look. They had their car towed and repaired, and they completed their road trip using only main highways. But sometimes, late at night, they would wake from dreams of heavy footsteps and dark eyes watching from the shadows. They had survived their encounter with something terrible in the cabin, but they would never forget the ogre named Grendok, or the fact that monsters were real, living in the forgotten places of the world, waiting for the lost and unwary to stumble into their domain.